So I was telling Bill the other day that I have certain Flag Day traditions. Flag Day, not a huge thing in my life before my senior year in high school, and even later on, not as big a deal as you might think, but it is meaningful to me. And because of that, we've had discussions about Flag Day before, and so I have a couple of Flag Day traditions. One of which is that I listened to the Dave and John episode from 2012 when I was telling John the story of John and Betsy Ross and how General Washington went to Betsy Ross to say, we need a new symbol and yada, yada, yada. And it involves the famous words that John delivered on me. He may have said, "Wench, flag me." Sorry, my camera moved and I got bumpy there, sorry. Ah, well, screw it. My other tradition is, very simply, I watch the movie The Sand Pebbles. There's some reasons for this. And I go back to my high school, Ogden High School in Ogden, Utah. It's a beautiful building. It's listed on the Register of Famous Buildings. It was built under the WPA in the 1930s. It is actually a bomb shelter, not a fallout shelter. It's actually a bomb shelter. Underneath there is a catacomb of tunnels and likes. It's an amazing place. It really is. It's really well built. And they just recently redid it, remodeled the inside and everything else. So it's a very beautiful place. And I never felt really comfortable or at home there. The reason was simple. Before my junior year, where we were living in Pueblo, Colorado, so I'd done my freshman and sophomore years at Pueblo South High School. And before my junior year, my parents were transferred. My parents, for those of you who don't know, were Salvation Army officers. They were transferred from Pueblo, Colorado to Ogden, Utah. And from the word go, getting to Ogden, which I love, don't get me wrong, Ogden, I consider Ogden to be my second hometown. I love the city of Ogden. I love Utah in some ways. But getting to Utah in 1979 was a different thing for me. And my parents, they were busy with their own thing. They didn't really grasp some of the difficulties that I was facing. But one of the difficulties I was facing was that I was not a member of the dominant religious practice in the state of Utah. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad for me. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to tell you is it made it very uncomfortable for me, particularly at times. The second thing that made it incredibly difficult was the Ogden school system would not accept my freshman credits because Colorado was on a 4-year system, Utah on a 3-year system. They would not accept my freshman credits. And so I had done extra work my freshman year, my sophomore year, and I was ahead of schedule. And Ogden City Schools basically said, no, you're a junior, but you need to retake remedial English because we don't accept that credit. And I was not happy about that. And I ended up with 2 English classes, a remedial English class and a junior English class. Stupid. But the other thing they did to me was because we got there so late, I missed auditions for band. So they put me in the beginner band. I'm all state Colorado. They put me in the beginner band because, well, you missed tryouts. So anyway, I had an English teacher for both of those classes. Her name was Ruth Darrington. And for some reason, and at the time I had no idea what the reason was, she just seemed to get me. I never understood why until years later. She seemed to understand my struggle. She seemed to understand my not fitting in kind of thing. All of these things she seemed to understand, if not innately, certainly better than most of my other teachers. There were two other teachers that did understand it and did deal with it similarly. But Mrs. Darrington was one of the ones that, of the three, she introduced me to the most new things. She introduced me to Shakespeare and basically blew off the remedial course. She basically said, you really don't need to be here. And so I would go to the library or something. Anyway, it was Mrs. Darrington that, along with Miss Thompson, knew that I was going into the Navy. And she decided one day in class to show us the movie, The Sand Pebbles. It's English, it's art, that kind of stuff. And so that was the first time I'd seen the movie, The Sand Pebbles. And all I can tell you is the impact of a 16, 17-year-old kid, because I'm not sure exactly when she showed it to us. I don't remember if it was early in the year or late in the year, but the impact that film had on me. Here's a guy from Utah going into the Navy, facing, difficulties. But there is a scene in that movie where the lieutenant, the commanding officer of the ship, played by Richard Crenna, gives a speech about Flag Day. And it's one of the most remarkable speeches, I think, you'll ever hear about Flag Day. And in fact, I played it on Bill's show the other day, if you want to hear that. That particular speech has stuck with me for years. I mean, it's unbelievable how long that has stuck with me. And the influence that had on me at the time was absolutely just remarkable to me. Mrs. Darrington was one of those teachers that had a huge influence and impact on me. Like I said, there were three: Mrs. Darrington, Mrs. Thompson, and I forgot her name. I know it. My band teacher. I can't think of her name now. My sister's going to yell at me because I can't remember it. This is the brain fog kicking in. Anyway, it'll come to me. The bottom line is, Mrs. Darrington had such a huge impact on me that for years after I graduated high school, if I happened to be in town, I would go visit her. In fact, on Halloween 1984, I happened to be in Ogden, and my best friend Lee, who was also in the English class with me, we played in Macbeth. He played Macbeth, I played Banquo. Anyway, we went and saw her on Halloween. We just went and knocked on her door on Halloween, trick or treat, and she made us come in, and we had a great time just talking. And she was just such a beautiful person and such a loving teacher. She was everything I wanted to know about teacher. And I never really understood why she seemed to get me. What it was about her that she seemed to resonate with me, that I didn't fit in Utah. I loved it there, but I didn't fit in. I didn't really, I don't know. There were a lot of things I could talk about, and I have talked about in the past with me at high school in Utah, but she seemed to get all that. And it wasn't until she passed away many, many years later that I found out why. You see, Mrs. Darrington was not LDS either. She was Methodist, just like me. She knew exactly what I was going through. She was very familiar with the Salvation Army, very familiar with what was going on, and she never let on to any of that, but she knew. The thing is that this year watching the Sand Pebbles, and don't get me wrong, I love the movie The Sand Pebbles. It's still one of my favorite movies. I don't know that I'd put it in my top 10. I only watch it once a year, but I love it. But I came to a realization this year about the movie The Sand Pebbles and the fact that I had seen that movie as a senior in high school at the ripe old age of 17, technically not an adult. Under the laws of Utah and the nation at that time, I was a child. Had to have my parents go with me to sign up in the Navy. What I realized this year watching that movie, about halfway through it, I realized that if someone showed that to a class today, my God, the reaction to that would be, well, groups would be pounding on the door and screeching about, how dare you show this to my children without my written permission to do so? How dare you show them this filth, this smut, this this outrageous depiction of Asia sailors as they do their thing in Asia. Once again, it would be adults using kids for their political agenda. You couldn't show that film today in high school. You couldn't show it to children, kids, and I was a kid. I was 17 at best. This has led me to the development over the past few days. I've been working on this for a while, but maybe this kind of helped coalesce what I'm now calling the Sand Pebbles theory, which is this idea that both sides, not just one or the other, but both sides, I think it's more noticeable on the left because I'm on the right. But I think that there are arguments to be made that it's on both sides. That said, it's this argument that there is the use of children to further my political agenda, to make these children be what I want them to be, and that way, I don't know, I get to pat myself on the back. And where this started was in considering the mental rationalizations that one has to make to be in favor of abortion. Now, again, I've said before, I'm not in favor of abortion. I oppose it. However, it's just not the hill I'm going to die on. If you don't want an abortion, don't get one. That said, I still don't think it's right, but my faith, my experience have taught me that I'm not going to change anybody's mind on this. But the mental rationalizations you have to go through to get to the idea that it's okay to abort a child on demand is remarkable to me. They are remarkable. What does it take to make that argument? Ask yourself that question. What is the argument in favor of abortion? There are some arguments that seem to lean into the idea that a fetus is not a human being. And that's where you have to get. You have to get to the idea that the fetus is not a human being in order to rationalize abortion. If you accept the idea that the fetus is a human being, you cannot be in favor of abortion, period. So you have to rationalize that it's not. Well, how do you do that? How do you get to that point? There are, as I said, some arguments, at least one, to which I see some merit. I don't agree with the argument, but I understand from whence it comes. It's an argument of faith. It's an argument of creation. It's an argument of, well, the idea that the inbreathing of the spirit happens when the child first breathes. I don't agree with that, but I can see the rationale behind that argument, particularly in the days before sonograms and the likes of that. I once watched Ben practice breathing on a sonogram. You have to make the argument, in order to be pro-abortion, you have to make the abortion on demand. You have to make the argument that you have reduced this to non-living. It's just a blob of tissue. And once you reach that point, you don't really have to make any other arguments. It's not alive. It's not a human being. It's nothing. It's my body. It's my choice. So therefore, I can do whatever I want to because it's my body, my choice, and this is not a human being. Once you've reached that rationale, what have you essentially done? You have dehumanized the baby, the child, the unborn child. You have taken away its humanity. That's what you've done. And it's real slippery slope from there, isn't it? Because once you start dehumanizing something, that's how you end up with T9 programs and euthanasia programs and eugenics programs like we had here in the United States in the early 1900s. It's how you end up with forced sterilizations like we did in California in 2006. Those things happen once you rationalize in your brain that it's not human, once you've taken away its humanity, once you have taken away liberty to self-actualize, to self-determine, then you can kill anything. Doesn't have to be a child. It can be an old person once you've taken that away. Now, I slowly started pulling that idea into what we're watching going on right now in our country, which in the midst of Pride Month is seemingly, depending on what you're watching, what you're following on social media, seemingly is drag queen show month. I mean, let's face it, that's what this has become. We actually have an attorney general in one state that's come out now and said drag queens are great. They need to be in every school. It's like we've reduced Pride Month to drag queens, and there you go. We're being overwhelmed by this drag queen nonsense. If you follow libs of TikTok on Twitter, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm almost to the point now, I was talking to Rod about this the other day. It seems forced to me. The libs of the left is wanting to shut down libs of TikTok because libs of TikTok is reposting their own posts, which tells me that they know that this is going to happen. So why are they doing it other than to troll? In other words, to try to create a situation? Or is it something more? Is it possible that all this stuff is just more blurring of the lines? This idea that we can rationalize that something is not what we have always said that it is. If we can say that an unborn child is not human, how hard is it to say this is a child, but ... There's a little bit of, it didn't take me long to do some research out there to find that there are people out there who want to destigmatize pedophilia, who want to call for the normalization of sexual relationships between adults and children. There are those who are, as you know, okay with that kind of stuff. There are people out there that are writing research papers. I'm not making this up. They are writing research papers such as this one regarding queer subtexts in children's literature. Now imagine if you were picking up a book, let's just say Tom Sawyer, which of course is a book that nobody wants you to read. Let's pick up another book. A Separate Peace, John Knowles, one of my favorite books. Now, instead of reading about the coming of age of some young men in a time of war in a boys' school, now I'm compelled to not read it that way. I'm compelled to read it as queer subtext, that all of these boys were gay and possibly even trans, and consequently, all the story now has to revolve around that instead of what I've been reading on the page since I was in high school. We're calling for the normalizations of these things. We're calling for the blurring of those lines. And this has been going on for a while. We're seeing calls for the normalization of pedophilia. We're seeing the sexualization of children. Some years ago, I was appalled when I first saw episodes of Toddlers and Tiaras. And I actually said, I believe I said this on air at the time, that show is just pedophilia. I mean, it's horrifying. Even worse in my mind was a show called Dance Moms, which I thought, the gal that ran the studio, she ended up going to jail for tax evasion, which is kind of funny in a way, but reality, she should have been in jail for child abuse. I couldn't believe that mothers would not only allow their children to be over-sexualized and hyper-sexualized like that, but on television and abuse the way that they were abused. It was horrifying to me, but this became hit TV. We're trying to normalize this. We're trying to make this happen. And nowadays on social media, of course, you get, things like the libs of TikTok, which if I'm on the conservative right, I'm praising because look what they're exposing. Well, okay. And if I'm on the left and I'm doing this stuff, knowing that libs of TikTok is going to post it, am I just not feeding them with this? You see where I'm starting to get this idea that what's really going on here is an effort to dehumanize everything, not just a fetus, an unborn child, if I can call an unborn child non-human, kill it. Who cares? But if I can say a child isn't really a child and it's normal for a child to be over-sexualized and over-involved and all those kinds of things, if I can say that what you are doing is contributing to that, then I can criticize you and I can snip your power and I can dehumanize you and at the same time get my political agenda through. And I'm not sure I trust either side on this. That's the thing that I'm saying. Last night I was sitting in a class. We were talking about two of my favorite words, freedom and liberty. And of course, we were talking about them from a theological standpoint, but I can't do that. As you know, I've got to talk about it from a metaphysical viewpoint and the fact that the two words are not the same. And I tried to make that argument. The two words do not mean the same thing. Even though in our language they've become synonymous, they're not. And they said, well, they're not synonymous. But yet right here on the page, it uses them interchangeably. So anyway, long story short, we talked about the idea that the denial of liberty, the denial of a person's self-actualization, self-realization, self-control, self-determination is essentially dehumanizing. So when we force someone to be something that they are not, however we've done that, by compelling them, by encouraging them, by whatever, we are essentially denying them their liberty, which is essentially dehumanizing them. And my theory is this: if we erase the distinctions, as we have tried to do in a society, between things like male and female, we're told that they're identical, they're the same thing, or between adult and child, liberty is essentially destroyed. And the ultimate goal here seems to me to be a homogenized society where everybody is the same. And if we deny that any differences exist between anybody, adult, child, male, female, whatever, we destroy liberty. And once we have destroyed liberty, once we have taken away liberty, well, then we can yell at anything, can't we? We can kill anything. And that's what scares me. It isn't just what our protests are about what kids are watching anymore. Now, it's how can we use that protest? How can we use that complaint? How can we use this social media? How can we use this ideology to destroy liberty? And in doing so, win the day?